Okay, today what we're going to do is we are going to make three pinch pots, small pinch pots that would fit in your hand. And what we're going to do is just kind of get a feel for the clay today, kind of get some clay working through our fingers, and we're going to experiment with some texture on the outside, and that way it'll give us an opportunity at a later date to learn how to use the stain, which is what makes this kind of darker color. The cool thing about pinch pots is that human beings have been making pinch pots for 20,000 years. There are pottery shards that date back to that point, and this is really just a simple method of forming a vessel using not really any tools. You're using your hands as the tools. And so what we're going to do is make something small, sort of like this, and we're going to just do this all in our hands. What you want to do is start by wedging out a piece of clay. So I wedged up this clay that was a little bit bigger than this, and then have a little bit of water, a little thing of water with you, and then have an assortment of things that you can use to texture. So a seashell, a piece of bark, screws and things like that. Anything that you think that you might want to use to texture the back of it. The inside we're going to keep smooth because we're going to experiment with some glazes later. So smooth on the inside and texture on the outside is what we're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a ball of clay, about like this. So this is about the size of a lime, and roll it into a ball, kind of get it into the rough shape of a sphere already. Then what we're going to do is just take our thumb and just push it in there, kind of like this. And so what we now have is we have this sphere with a hole into it. Make sure obviously you don't push through the back, but right now I have the thickness about that thick. Okay, I'm going to thin that out a little bit as I go. But what you do is you just kind of, with that hole, sort of this donut here, in your hand, you're just going to slowly sort of pinch out. What I'm doing is kind of pinching in this shape here. And I'm kind of starting at the bottom here and kind of working my way around, kind of slowly kind of turning the clay. And you can see, so I'm sort of pinching it with one hand and I'm kind of rotating it with the other. And just kind of take your time with this. You kind of use the palm of your hand as like a base, so it'll kind of naturally keep the form of the inside of your hand here. So you're almost using the palm of your hand like a template, and then just kind of slowly work your way around like this. At this point, I don't stress too much about making this top edge perfect. I mostly want you guys to just experiment with the clay, kind of get a feel for it. If you already have experience working with clay, this is a great way to get your hands dirty again, and just kind of get the feel for this particular type of clay. Also, all clay is a little bit different, so you might have had some experience with say porcelain in the past, or a terracotta, and so this gives you a chance to kind of learn a little bit about the stoneware that we're using. I wouldn't worry about all these terms right now if you're totally new to clay, because we'll explain them later in the semester. Okay, so what you can do, or what you notice here, is that I'm kind of still pretty thick, but it's even. So that's what I'm trying to do, is when I'm kind of going around like this, not only am I pinching the clay, but I am looking for places that are a little bit too thick, and I push down a little bit harder. And if there's areas that are too thin, then I don't push there. So now you can see that the top edge is getting a little bit cracked up a little bit, just because I'm stretching this clay out, and that's what the water is for. So what I would do is just take you don't need very much, just a tiny bit of water, and put a little bit on the edge here, and then just work your finger over it like this, and so that'll smooth it out. Now this is it's a good idea to do this maybe a few times throughout the process of you making the pinch pot. You know, don't wait for it to get really cracked up, because you don't want the clay to fully separate. But what I'm doing now is I'm just taking that little tiny bit of water and I'm compressing the edge here, and it's strengthening that edge. Okay, so now I'm going to keep going around, and you know what you want to do here is you don't have to make this like paper thin, because we're going to be working on the outside of the object with some texture. So you want to have a little bit of clay there to work with. So you know, don't stress about this. This is just an exercise to learn a little bit more about clay, and allow your fingers to kind of like get the feel for it. Okay, so now what I'm doing, you can kind of see I'm almost kind of bouncing it in my hand here. I'm you know, I just keep rotating it. I do want to keep this kind of domed on the back, so I don't want to have this flat. So don't work on it on the table, because if you work on it on the table, then you'll get a flat spot. What we're going to be doing is we're going to put feet on the bottom like this one, and so we want to have that surface here, because one of the things that we're going to do at a later point too is we're going to experiment with glaze, and in particular combinations of glaze. And it's nice to have a kind of a rounded bottom here so that the glaze kind of pools up and you get some different layers, you know, of different thicknesses. Okay, so I'll just try to kind of speed this up just a little bit, kind of work a little bit faster. When you do yours, just take your time, and you know, I really kind of like the sort of handprints here on the outside. The other thing that I'm kind of doing with my thumb is I'm kind of every once in a while kind of doing this where I'm smoothing out the inside. Okay, because this is going to be where we're going to glaze, so I don't want to have too much texture there. You know, later on with our projects we might do a lot of texture on the areas that we'll glaze, but for now, you know, I want to have a smooth interior. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm kind of starting to thin out the rim a little bit, so you can see it's getting a little closer to the thinness of this one. So I'm working a little bit up here, a little more on the rim, and kind of, you know, every once in a while still checking to see if I'm, you know, have a good thinness throughout the whole vessel. So right there was just a little bit of a crack kind of developing. You know, since I put water on this a little while ago, you know, the rim is already pretty wet, so I don't really need a lot of water now. I just need a little pressure from my finger. You know, at this point you don't need any tools. You know, your hands are your tools. Okay, so now finishing up the rim here. I like that it's got a little bit of undulation here. If you would rather have yours be perfectly flat, you can just, you know, kind of scrape that down just a little bit, like it's a little pie right there. But you know, I like a little variation in these. So you can see on the bottom I'm kind of using my hand to kind of rotate like that. Okay. If this is getting really really floppy, like it's hard for you to control it, you can always set it upside down like that, and you know, work on another one, or you know, go get a drink or something, and come back, and this will be set up a little bit. But you should be able to, you know, carefully sort of gently handle it like this. Okay. So that's pretty good. I might, you know, if I were going to spend a little bit more time on this, I'd probably thin it out a little bit more, but just for the sake of this demo, I think this is okay. So again, you can kind of see, you know, smooth on the inside. You know, right now it's relatively smooth on the outside, but what I'd like to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to texture this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a few things that I had kind of laying around. There's a this little piece of alt thread and this bolt, and I'm going to just kind of start rolling this, and you can kind of see it's sort of making like this crosshatch pattern. you know, every tool is going to make a little bit of a different type of pattern. So you can see this is also, you know, screw thread here, but the pattern is much different, sort of much finer, you know, almost like a thread-like pattern, you know, on that. So I'm kind of just, you know, I'm going to go a little bit more quickly for the sake of the demo, but you know, what I would do is I would just experiment, you know, maybe come back and go over the texture a few times with some different things and kind of experiment to see, you know, something that you might want to work with. Also keep in mind that the stain is going to accentuate the texture. That said, it's always a good idea to go a little bit on the overkill side of the texture, just because right now the clay is dark, you know, it has a darker value, and so it's a little easier to see the texture, but as it goes through the firing process, the texture often has a tendency to sort of visually flatten, and so it becomes a little harder to see. Additionally, kind of in the future when you're glazing over some of this texture, certain glazes can really kind of cover and obscure the texture. So I always tell people, you know, if you want a particular texture, you know, go a little bit more than it seems like when you're doing it. Like if it seems a little bit too intense as it goes through the firing process, it's probably going to be perfect. Okay, so now we have the back is textured. I'm going to just set that down for a second. I'm going to take my other little bit of clay here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out some little balls of clay here, about like that, like a really small little marble. Okay, so you know, you can make those square or any shape you want, but what I'd like for you to do is put some feet on it so that it has a raised, so that this part of the pinch pot is raised off of the kill shelf when we set it on the kill shelf. Because what I'd like for you to learn how to do is do the stain throughout the whole bottom without the stain sticking to the shelf. And so I'm going to use three little legs here, and you know, so what I'm going to do is kind of like sort of visually kind of see where they need to go. Then I'm going to take my water, and I'm just going to put a little bit of water on the end of the ball of clay. Now in the future we're going to be doing a method called scoring and slipping, but this clay is wet and this is already wet too, and so as long as we have a little bit of moisture and some pressure from our hands, that's enough to get the clay to stick. Now don't just sort of set it there, because that might, well, see, it's rolling off already, but if you just go like that, sometimes it'll stay even through the drying process, but then when it goes through the pre-firing, or what's called the bisque firing, that little ball will pop off. Okay, so what we want to do is kind of really like, so I'm bracing it on the inside here, and I'm kind of squishing it in there like that, kind of twisting it, kind of turning it a little bit, and you can see right here I have a you know, a pretty good seal. The clay is you know, really stuck together. Okay, so I'm going to do that for the other ones. I don't want too much water here because I don't want it to get too slippery, but I'm just going to kind of push that on there like that. Make sure you get a really good seal. You know, if it's sliding around, you don't want that either. You want it to really kind of grab in there. And then we'll do our last one. It's like our little three-legged table here. So with 3 points you can be assured that it won't wobble, because three-legged tables do not wobble. Okay, so I'm going to dry my hands off here with this dry sponge, and kind of make sure that these are kind of stuck on there. Now you can see I've kind of you know, sort of made some more divots here with my hand because I was using that as a pressure point there. So I'm going to kind of sort of hold this, being careful not to damage the feet there. It just kind of smooth those out and kind of work on the inside here, kind of get it back to where it was, you know. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently sort of set it down and use a slight amount of pressure to make sure that the feet stick, or not really well, stick to the clay here, but also kind of flatten just a little bit so I can get something that sits right. If I don't want it to sit at an angle or something like that, if I want it to be sitting up right here. And this allows me also to take another look at the inside and kind of smooth out this the interior curve. Okay, so now I have something like that. You can go back and texture this. I sort of like that there's a different different surface here than here. So I'm going to probably leave this. That difference in coloration there with the slip, that'll dry it out later and you won't notice it. And then the very last thing you do is take a pencil or a needle tool or something and just scratch your initials, right here. Like that. Okay, so now we have our pinch spot, and that's how you do it. So, again, just take your time, and we're going to make 3 of these for class, but feel free to make several more, and you can pick out the best 3. The more you have, the objects, the more you can experiment with the glaze and the different colors and different things like that. These are going to be designed as things that we can experiment with the colors with. So if, for example, if you want later on with one of your projects, if you want to have like a maroon red, then you can test that out on one of your pinch spots first. So, and then I usually recommend just drying it upright like this, unless it's really floppy. If you're feeling like it's gonna fall over, you can set it upside down and let it dry a little bit like that. After it dries a little bit, I'll come back and kind of clean up the initials there, just because this is not the best tool to put your initials in. But that's it, and just get your hands dirty and get your hands on the clay.